this is, man, it's a really good movie.
Mhm.
The tension that you feel over the course of 90 minutes, it's not over long, and just the good exploration of why we believe things and why we change our minds.
It isn't easy to stand alone against ridicule. And maybe if we're being honest with ourselves, we can think of a time when we compromised too because we didn't love being the only one taking the stand.
Yeah.
In a world where entertainment is viewed as mindless diversion, only good for momentary distraction, you are about to enter a new world, and you will never view entertainment in the same way again. This is Popcorn Theology.
Welcome, movie lovers and theology nerds, to Popcorn Theology, where we examine films for where they align with our greatest story and greatest storyteller of all, discussing what to receive, reject, and redeem for common ground, fruitful conversation, and mindful movie consumption. I'm juror number 1.
And I'm juror number 2.
And we are going to stick with that all the way to the end of the podcast, referring each other only by our jury numbers, just to stick on theme as we cover, well, I might be stealing your line, 12 Angry Men. No, for real, my name's Miles. I'm your lead host today, inviting Bridget back on. And and what movie are we covering again?
We are covering 12 Angry Men, the 1957 classic film.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Miles. I'm sorry.
Well, wow. We're really on top of it today. I was just thinking, have you seen any other versions of this movie?
I have not, no.
Yeah, the first time I saw a version of this movie, believe it or not, I was in China. I happened to be sitting down and watching this movie, these guys deliberating in this room, and I noticed the subtitles, and I was like, this must be that 12 Angry Men movie. But they don't have the same legal system, so they created something else that took place on a campus.
Okay.
And then also, in searching for this movie, I found a bunch of different versions. We are looking at the 1957 version, and who directed that and starred in it? Go, Bridget.
Yeah. So this 1957 American version of this film was directed by Sidney Lumet, and it was adapted by Reginald Rose from his own teleplay, and it stars Henry Fonda, who will get lots of discussion time as our conversation goes on here.
And it stars 11 other great men, but I couldn't figure out what was a good list to leave them off. So Henry is the one who gets all the spotlight. Yeah. And the story of 12 Angry Men is, a story of 12 jurors trapped in a hot room deliberating the fate of a seemingly guilty 18-year-old kid from the slums. And he's on trial for murder of his father. Right. And it seems like an open and shut case. Everybody is convinced it's going to be a quick deliberation, except for one of the jurors who asks them, is it possible that this boy is innocent? And he effectively inspires them to take a careful examination of the evidence and try to pursue, well, really true blind justice. And so we have Popcorn Theology. We have 2 types of ratings. We have popcorn for its the quality as a movie or enjoyability of as a movie, and theology, which is how good of a theological talking point we can draw from it. So if this is a bucket of popcorn, Bridget, for you, is it stale, fresh, or buttered and salted?
I'm swinging for the fences on this one, Miles. It is buttered and salted all the way for me.
Okay. And then, for me, I honestly couldn't quite get to buttered and salted, although it is rewatchable.
Yeah.
And I think here's where I'll leave it before we get into the deeper discussion. There's a reason why this movie has been remade over and over again, because it's worth watching over and over again, even when you know how it turns out.
Mm-hmm.
So our popcorn ratings, I think I'm very fresh is where I put it. Not quite buttered and salted. Okay, for theology, if this is our soda, is it diluted, carbonated, or cup runneth over with things to talk about theologically? What do you think, Bridget?
Well, I'm gonna kind of reverse our roles here maybe a little bit. I struggled to decide which category to put this one in.
Okay.
If we're going to define those terms just based sheerly on the number of themes that we have to talk about, then I would maybe put it in the carbonated category. But if we're talking about the depth of those themes, then I think I could be convinced to go to cup runneth over. So it's not. I think most of what we have to say tonight is going to be kind of contained to a couple of very important talking points. But there's going to be a lot to say about those talking points. So
yeah, and it's you will think about this movie for a while after. It's one of those movies where you can keep digging the depths in. I'd say thoroughly carbonated, kind of the middle for me. It's not explicitly theological, but themes of justice and pursuing justice and your role as a third party to an incident, to a crime or a sin. Boy, it's just rich, and this should be a fun one for us. And so before we dive into our spoiler free, although this movie is 70 years old, we get some of our 70 years old. Well, that's part of the fun of this movie that we'll talk about is seeing a 70-year-old movie and seeing how it's the same and different. That was very fun for me with this one. That's a little bit of a spoiler before we drop our ads here is, I want you to, if you think this is a valuable conversation, if you like to deliberate, even in a hot room, about the movies you watch and the messages they communicate and how they relate to faith and philosophy and deeper things, give us a like, share, subscribe, help keep the conversation going. You know that this summer I actually ran into a fan of the podcast who I didn't actually know personally. That was very, very cool.
That's amazing.
And I hope we can share it around. Take a look at our shorts, share them on your social media. And then also, if you want to actually become part of the deliberating body, for just a few dollars a month, you can become a patron saint of Popcorn Theology, help guide the direction of our podcast through voting. And that's actually, I forgot, 12 Angry Men. Our patron saints sent us back to 1957. This is a patron saint pick. I forgot about that in my excitement to talk about it. This was a good one. And so,
if I may jump in there, Miles, really quickly too, I think it's worth mentioning that both you and I came out of the Patreon community, and that is how we are here even talking on this podcast right now. So
we worked our way. Out of the alternate pool into the real jury.
We got called up to sit on the juries.
Thank you. We're gonna
cool to be.
It's great.
Group.
We're in an even smaller exclusive group of people who worked their way onto the podcast. And so, we'll drop our ads and come back after the spoiler warning and talk more about 12 Angry Men.
Up in the sky, look! It's a bird! It's a plane! Cinemagog, The Marvelous Era. James Harleman here, the cinema guy, announcing the sequel to my first book on film and faith. Let's face it, entertainment has changed dramatically since the first book published in 2012, and comic book characters and franchises are everywhere. So I decided to set my sights on superheroes and examine the evolution of Hollywood in this follow-up to the first Cinemagog book. For example, what does Loki tell us about culture's view of God? Why does the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Infinity Saga continually align with biblical themes? In the Marvelous Era, I review each film and show not only how the individual movies express gospel parallels, but each phase essentially reveals a multi-point sermon. I also explore DC, Star Wars, the Monsterverse, and more. Without compromising scriptural truth, we can sift these stories and discover how we might reject, receive, and redeem ideas for personal reflection and Christian conversation. Also, has Hollywood's messaging gotten worse? The book explores ways these marvelous mythologies correspond with conversion, Christian living, church history, and Reformation, but I do also highlight what has been the entertainment industry's darker, indoctrinating decade, as well as toxic fandom and the dangers of immersion in pop culture that just might drown us spiritually if we're not careful. So suit up, assemble, and join me on a journey to the Infinity Saga and beyond. Cinemagog, The Marvel Us Era. Now available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle editions.
Okay, we're back. Now we're in spoiler territory for a movie 70 years old. Which, by the way, if you've gotten this far, I watched this for free on Tubi or Pluto. By the time you listen to this, probably still will be free. This movie is worth sitting down and watching. You could pause. I should have said this before the spoiler warning, but again, we have not been on top of it today so far. But our conversation will be very rich. And so now we're getting to
turn it around.
This is where we turn it around.
Yeah.
This is where we shift from being guilty. This is where the room slowly turns from being super hot and the rain comes and washes away all excuses until we finally come together. I mean, that's even a neat thing. I'm not sure what all that is about, where the heat changes throughout the plot.
Yeah.
And you go, I was like, okay, there's some kind of message there. Often rain has a kind of baptismal effect or a washing effect. And you go, like, finally the fan is working. You go, oh, this is almost like maybe that world is constructed in a way to reward them as they're pursuing justice. I don't know. But that's more theological. We'll go back into popcorn. So you said this is buttered and salted. Give us a few reasons why.
Yeah, it's fun. I feel like I'm in that jury room right now. Like we're taking our vote, and I'm the one who has to convince you to come along to the buttered and salted side. So I think actually the point that you were just making about the heat changing throughout the movie, I hadn't even thought about that. I think that could be some fun to talk about later. One of the things that I was thinking about with my popcorn thoughts was just the camera angles in this movie. And you know what I'd be really interested to go back and see again is if there's any kind of overlap between the change in temperature and the change in the type of camera angle that we're getting. I hadn't thought about that until right now. So if there's an astute
so that means that this movie is good enough to return to, that it's almost like it's a buttered and salted popcorn.
Almost like that, Miles. I think one could say that it's buttered and salted if one were so inclined. But one of the things I love about the camera angles here is the way that we start in with the first time we go into the jury room, we have kind of a broad shot of the room. It looks like a relatively large, expansive space. And then as the movie continues on, we start to see those tracking shots that narrow in on one individual juror. And then we start to get those really close-up shots on different guys' faces. And I think Sidney Lumet just did a fabulous job in his direction of getting these angles that they start to make the viewer of the film feel as claustrophobic as the men in the room surely were feeling, if we're considering these characters to be real people. So you add in the heat on top of that. I put this down lower in my points on the sheet, but just the sweat that you see show up on these men. I thought it was such a great little detail that would have been easy to overlook. It would be easy to just have your character say, man, it's hot in this room. But to have them all actually sweating through their clothes is just a great, except for juror number 4, of course, who apparently
of course, he doesn't sweat, except for.
Yeah, he doesn't sweat. I love that guy.
That's a great setup. That's, was it? Chekhov's sweat. You mentioned it, dance. But my wife mentioned too, we watched this together and she's like, that means somebody must have been running around getting the exact right amount of sweat on all these people between their scenes. And there's actually really a lot of thought that went into the sweat, and it would be kind of easier to ignore.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, just again, from a popcorn perspective, I think that kind of attention to detail and just the way that the audience is really made to feel the same things that you would assume these men would be feeling if they're really stuck in a very hot juror's room. And then just some other things that I really liked from the popcorn perspective. It was striking me today as I was rewatching this movie, just watching grown men have to constantly keep each other in check. And I thought it's interesting to me, all the different ways that masculinity showed up in this movie. Yeah. I think every single one of these men is masculine, but it shows up in very different ways. So you have masculinity, but then you also have this gentlemanly interaction between all of these guys as well. So as soon as one guy's temper starts to flare, all of a sudden there are 2 or 3 more guys around him like, hey, take it easy, calm down. He didn't mean it. They kind of have this gentlemanly agreement that they're not going to lose their cool. And I just thought that interaction between all of them was really interesting to watch, to see who stepped up at different times to be the calming voice, and also who was it at different times who was about to lose it too, because I think they almost all of them took a turn being the very emotionally upset and ready to burst out kind of person.
There's the big dramatic moments, but I liked when the older juror, I think it's number 9, was like, I was talking to the gentleman on your right, thank you very much, or something like that. Where like, oh, okay. It actually was one of the times in which the anger was kind of appropriate and served justice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you see so many of them, just the character progression with so many of these characters as well. When they're all first talking, when they first get into the deliberation room, they're all kind of very polite and, just, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry, I was in the restroom. I'm sorry, they're very cordial with each other. And then as the movie goes on, we start to see that erode, and you see the real passions. You start to see the real character traits come out in all of the jurors as well. Yeah. So I love that, we're literally talking about one room. So this film basically has one set filled with 12 actors. And yet here we are talking about character progression, and we're talking about camera angles. Like the fact that it can be such a masterpiece, such a piece of art when it's contained to just this one space. Like nowadays we're so accustomed to the movies that have the big explosions and the special effects and huge casts and
quick
and
cuts,
this is the opposite of that. Quick cuts, yes.
Oh, there's one scene in particular. There's one scene in particular where it's kind of early in the movie where it's a really long cut of it. The camera moves across as they're talking and goes between them and then moves back. I think it's right before the bathroom scene.
Okay.
I was like, wow, that was a long take.
Yeah.
It almost felt like a play. This could be this could be done as a play. Yeah.
It could be. Absolutely, it could be. Yep.
Okay. Any more popcorn thoughts?
Just a really quick, I think I hit most of what I wanted to. So just a quick couple of other things. First of all, Jack Warden, who is juror number 7, may look familiar to fans of While You Were Sleeping. That is one of our favorite Christmas movies, I think, here on the podcast. So I just wanted to give a shout out to, he's Saul in that movie. So it's just fun to see a younger version of him.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to point that out. I think you and I are going to at some point talk about the jurors being known only by their numbers and never by their names. I just also wanted to give a shout out to the time period. I loved the fact that these men came to their jury duty dressed in suits. We don't live that way anymore. And I just think that that's wonderful. And then just the final thing. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, it's funny because I came home from church and I had a collared shirt on. And I went, you know what? I'm going to keep that collared shirt on for the podcast. And I got home and it was hot and I just immediately took the shirt off because it's 2026.
Yes, right. You don't have to do that. Yeah. But it was nice to see that, just kind of a throwback to a bygone era. And then just the final thing really quickly, I just really appreciate the portrayal of the American justice system. I think it's not for nothing. I think it's worth mentioning that we live in a place where you are innocent until proven guilty. There's no such thing as proving innocence in our jurisprudence. There is only proving guilty. And I think, this movie just does such a wonderful job of really diving into what does that mean? What does that look like? And I think it's got to be very, very difficult when you can't be sure about the innocence, but that's not your job. That's not your task. Your task is to be sure about the guilt. And if you can't get there, then where does that leave you? You have to acquit at that point. So I just really appreciate the way that these men grapple with that. I think it's a wonderful portrayal of what our justice system should look like.
And it makes me a little bit proud and thankful to be an American.
Yes.
Like I think it's juror 11 who has the thick accent. I don't know where he's from, but he talks about, oh, how good this is. This is a good responsibility. We should take this seriously. We should be a part of it. And so there's a richness there. So I'm still very fresh. I don't know. It's pretty buttery and salted at this point. To convince me, no, I'm still holding out. Well, I'm not going to let this movie get away, slip through my fingers. No,
I will cross-examine after you make your points.
Yeah. But the second time watching it, this is, man, it's a really good movie. The tension that you feel over the course of 90 minutes, it's not over long, and just the good exploration of why we believe things and why we change our minds is really interesting, as it's not purely facts, it's not purely emotion, it's not purely relationships, but it's all those things playing with each other is very interesting. And then, like you were alluding to, I like the time capsule. 1957 was almost 70 years ago.
Yeah.
Just little things like the water container is made of glass. And then that, like, the hand drying thing is the big roll of towels. I'm not even sure how that works, but for me, I go, ew.
Yes.
Ew. And then, like, another thing I liked is people in 1957 going, kids these days.
Yeah.
Right? It's tempting in every generation to say, oh, the kids are going downhill. But it's like just every generation has been saying kids these days. When I was a kid, they showed respect.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not. Ecclesiastes says it's foolish to say why are the old days better than these days? And so sometimes it makes me go, maybe I shouldn't complain so much about kids these days. If in 57 they're saying that. Another interesting thing, this is almost theological point, but it was interesting to hear them say things about the slums that you're so used to that kind of language be put into a racial context, but seeing that be generally toward these poor people is kind of what they're doing was very interesting to wrestle with. And then a silly thing, this movie taught me what L train stands for. In my head, I thought it was L. For years, I thought it was just like, but it's L isn't elevated. And I was like, I was today years old when I realized that L train means elevated train.
That's
and I'd even seen this movie before.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a good movie. It's rich. And yeah, this is going to be fun to talk about. So let's start diving into some of our theological thoughts. To start with, you were bringing this up is maybe before we were talking about. Actually, I have one thought before. You know what I found interesting about 1957, the same kind of connection, is in this movie, did you notice what their impression of what a preacher is like in this movie? Is, in particular, juror number 3, who's not the most reliable spokesman for that age, but he was saying preachers are these bleeding heart, soft people who consider the background and the feelings about somebody more than the facts of the case.
Yeah.
Like feelings more than facts. And I just thought, boy, in 70 years, the public perception of a preacher has really shifted to, like, nowadays, they're seen as portrayed often as just these hate-filled people or total hypocrites. Yeah. But these jurors said, oh, they're softies. And my wife pointed out when we talked about this, she said, yeah, what's funny is that the preaching back then was probably more hellfire and brimstone than today. Yeah. The public perception has really, really shifted.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. But on the bright side, the person who's associated with the preacher type behavior is the good guy.
Yeah.
It is juror number 8, who's our hero. And I didn't really notice until the very end of the movie, like, how is he dressed? All in white, in purity. He's like this angel who comes in here. And so as a background for this whole movie, I think this movie presents pretty well biblical ideas of, like, capital punishment is serious, right? So this juror 8 at the beginning is just saying, why don't we give it an hour? Because a man's life is at stake. I'm just saying it's possible. Is it possible that he was innocent? And Deuteronomy 17:6 says, on the evidence of 2 witnesses or of 3 witnesses, the one who is to die shall be put to death. A person shall not be put to death on the evidence of 1 witness. The idea is, even back in the day when they had no forensics, like, you needed multiple witnesses in order to put somebody to death. And it even goes on to say in Deuteronomy, the witness is the one who's going to throw the stone. You have to be willing to put a little bit of skin in the game. And so overall, just this value of being serious about justice. Like, a lot of these guys just were willing to blow this kid off, but now they want to be serious about him. And then what I think is a core idea for a biblical observer of this movie is the call to blind justice in Deuteronomy chapter 1, where it says, I charge your judges at the time, hear the cases between your brothers and judge righteously between a man and his brother or the alien who is with him. You shall not be partial in judgment. You shall hear the small and the great alike. You shall not be intimidated by anyone, for the judgment is God's. And I think juror number 8 embodies this. You shall not be intimidated by anyone. You shall hear your brother or even the alien, so somebody you don't consider to be one of you. Here we have juror number 8, who we only find his name at the end, is an embodiment of this blind justice. Hero clothed in white, who just asks the average person, consider that it's possible that your prejudices and your first view of something might be wrong. And this is an idea that's impacted our world. Like, I did a little bit of research before this, and in the Greco-Roman world, the world of Jesus and Paul, your status literally was evidence in court for both your guilt and your level of sentencing. If you were a high status person, meaning high birth, political connections, education, wealth, citizenship status, you would get more partial treatment because of your status. And this is one of those things when the Bible tells you to take position as the lowly. Some of this is behind this is don't consider yourself better than others. Don't take all this status. Associate with the lowly, those who literally have less status. And this would actually affect their justice system. And so I'm happy I live in this time and place that has been affected by the biblical worldview on blind justice, impartial justice. And so, man, that's the thing I think that people will get inspired by when they watch this movie. And so I gave an extra point at the beginning there, but I think that's a good background here is this Deuteronomy chapter 1 idea that's influenced. And so with that background, what kind of theology thoughts did you have? I cede the floor to you.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's first of all, that's really good stuff, Miles. I think after rewatching this movie this afternoon, it was also just my second time ever seeing it, and it had been a long time since the first time I watched it. But I've had so much pinging around in my head about these ideas of justice, and it's really, I think this movie it accomplishes a couple of things. It somehow seems to simultaneously say that truth exists and it's out there, but also sometimes it's not knowable either, and that's where there's room for doubt. So I'm still kind of working through this tangle of where does that leave us. I think, in just simply the context of the courtroom, it's a good thing that we have room for doubt. We can't, if we aren't sure, then there's a way that we are supposed to vote to show that, to indicate that. When you take that outside of the courtroom and make it have broader applications, that's where things get a little bit murky. So I feel like maybe some of that will come up even in our receive, reject, redeem round. But for now, the theological talking point that I wanted to bring up was the parable of the sower. So after the movie was over, I was just kind of struck by the process of how we went from juror number 8 being the standalone voice for let's talk about this, let's think this through, to then by the end of the movie, we have all 12 jurors on the same side that they are going to acquit. So how do we get there? And I want to be careful when I bring up this talking point. I am not trying to draw a direct parallel between what we see portrayed in the movie necessarily and this parable from the Bible. I'm not trying to say that this is a perfect picture of that parable. This is just kind of, when I finished watching the movie, this is what was in my mind. And it seemed kind of like one way that the parable can play out in real life.
So kind of a redeem point. Okay, hit us with it.
Yeah, kind of like that. So if it's okay if I just read a few verses from Matthew chapter 13, it's verses 1 through 9 where we get this parable of the sower. It says, that same day Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow, but when the sun came up, the plants were scorched. They withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil where it produced a crop, 160 or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear. And so I think kind of what put me in this frame of mind was just considering that in the context of this movie, and again, not a perfect parallel, but in the context of this movie, we have juror number 8 trying to sow the seed, right? He's trying to bring up points that the other men hadn't thought of, and you can see different ways that the other jurors react to that. So, Miles, please feel free to jump in here at any point and flush this out a little bit. But.
The parable of the soils is about people receiving the kingdom, and then the ways in which pressures or hard-heartedness makes them reject the kingdom. So if we just say, well, part of the kingdom is accepting truth, then those parallels kind of work, and we get this. These are like a bunch of soil, these 12 guys, and evidence and propositions that it's possible that this kid is innocent is spread across them. So I kind of see where you're going with this. This could be fun.
Yeah. So I guess, another way to look at it too is that maybe instead of looking at juror number 8 as the person who is like sowing the seed, more so looking at him as the person who receives it, who receives the seed, and it grows in good soil and it produces fruit. And then we see others start to fall in line there with that same result. I think we talked about juror number 7, who is the juror who's so obsessed with his baseball tickets.
Yeah, the baseball tickets.
Yeah. So I know he kind of seemed like an interesting character study for you. I don't know if you want to jump in here and talk about him at all.
The thing is that I had ideas for these different jurors, but I think what you're getting at, it actually really helps me because I was going, I want to talk about how shameful it is that he wanted to go to this baseball game rather than pursue justice. And he was even willing to flip-flop just to whatever gets him to the game fastest.
Yes.
And at the end, they were like, no, I want you to make a decision on whether he's innocent or not.
Yeah.
And so I would argue that he's kind of like the third soil that is in the thorns. Jesus describes it as the worries and cares and the deceitfulness of riches that come out and choke out the productivity of this. And so it's like, this silly thing like a baseball game is choking out this man's responsibility to pursue justice.
Yeah.
Yeah, you filled in a puzzle piece that was missing for me.
Yeah,
I had a lot to say about juror 3 and 8 and 10.
Yes,
but I was trying to figure out about number 7.
There's even a point in the movie, I believe it's juror number 11, who's the European immigrant, who says to number 7. So it's right at that moment when juror number 7 switches his vote very quickly just so he can get out of the room faster. He just feels like these deliberations are taking too long. And juror number 11 calls him out and says to him, "What kind of man are you?" And I think that moment in that movie was just a very powerful one. Again, going back to this idea of masculine men and having one say to another, like, take stock of yourself right now. Like, really do some self-assessing and answer this question. What kind of man are you that you are so flippant about this other person's life because you have baseball tickets? So I just think that that's a really powerful moment and a great metaphor for this thorny soil.
Yeah. So we have juror 8 as kind of as the fruitful soil that's reproducing. Yeah. So we've got the thorny soil. Who do you think kind of represents the other soils?
Yeah, this is where things get a little interesting. I think 3 and 10 are the obvious choices, right? For the rocky and the soil. Birds just eat it without it never even gets planted in the first place. So I don't know where you would land on this, Miles, and I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts. And if you want to expound on what the different types of soil are, biblically speaking, please jump in on that too.
So the hard path is the people who hear but basically ignore the gospel. And so it says the birds of the air representing Satan, take it away. And so I think you have right there, juror number 3. He's got issues in his past. I think I'd like to talk about that a little later, but he's holding on to unforgiveness and resentment, and that's why the soil's not why the seed's not coming in. And then juror number 10 is prejudice toward those slum kids.
Yeah.
He cannot hear justice. He cannot hear the evidence because his heart is hard.
Yeah.
Now, what's trickier is I don't know if we'll find. I'm thinking about soil number 2. It's rocky soil. So that is like what it represents in the real life is somebody who hears the gospel, appears to be a Christian, is excited to embrace the kingdom, but a little bit of persecution hits them. Well, not a little bit, probably a lot. The sun scorches them. So persecution or social pressures, and they fall away.
Yeah.
And so it's a good lesson for us, but I'm working on it.
The only thought I have there is it's the way that I keep thinking about it is we don't see juror number 3. This is where the parallel starts to fall apart a little bit, right? So he's not like someone who hears the truth of the gospel and is so excited about it. We don't really see that element portrayed. But I just find it a little bit interesting if we look at it from like the quote persecution angle. Part of the reason why his heart is so hard and why he's so unable to hear the truth is because of the complications in his own relationship with his son. And so if we kind of look at that as like his persecution, then I almost wonder what what side would he have been on if his relationship with his son had been better? Would he have been more able to hear the truth? Would he maybe even already be on juror number 8's side? Maybe if he had a good relationship with his son, he would look at this young man accused of killing his father and automatically think, oh, there's no way a boy could do that to his own father. So who knows how things could be different. But if you kind of, look at that as his persecution, maybe, that it kind of, it's flimsy, but, it could work to put him on that rocky soil.
The persecution and kind of social pressure affects kind of all of them. Like, one thing I found in this movie is being almost disturbed by the fact that it's like, we guys were so convinced that he was guilty, and then some of it is social pressure that gets them to flip over. Now, they go through the facts, and that's good, but there's certain points. Like, one of the guys, he says, well, I'm going to vote not guilty because that man took a stand, and it takes courage to take a stand. You go, well, that's somewhat admirable, but that's not why you decide guilty or non-guilty. But he was just progressing things along. So some of them, like the sun kind of scorches either direction, and that's where the parallel falls a little bit. But that's a fun way to think, because a jury, they're 12 people, and you go, the same message hits them all, and yet they are divided. Like, it was really interesting when they were 6-6, at that point.
Yeah.
So I guess, well, what I think is interesting, like some of the points I drew out of this, is why these people changed their mind and how they were shown to be hard-hearted. Like number 3 in particular. Let's go to 3. This guy, when we think 12 angry men, most of the time I watch this movie, well, it's one angry man. But why is he angry, and why is he so resistant? And I think a principle in this movie that shows you is that your own sin and your unforgiveness and your hypocrisy will blind you to justice. So juror number 3 is the most resistant, and it's because he's holding on to resentment for his son. He's blinded, he's being a little hypocritical. So obviously, not obviously, it took a while to dig. I actually had a hard time in this movie. I had to sit with it. Why does he tear up the boy's picture in the end? All these things, but you go, oh, as the movie goes, it's unfolding hypocrisy in these men. And in particular, there's one point in the movie, I don't remember which juror says it, but they're talking about the defendant, the kid that grew up in the slums. And it says, he don't speak good English, And the person says, doesn't. And there's this little unveiling of his hypocrisy. And even before that, juror number 3 had already had an outburst of anger and said, well, I'm sorry, I got carried away. But then eventually at the point where he says, you don't simply yell, I'm going to kill you unless you mean it. And then juror number 8 gets under his skin. He says, you avenger, you sadist, and the guy gets insulted, and he goes, I'll kill you. And you go, oh.
Yeah.
A performance contradiction. And it's like, okay, when you've seen this, once you've actually been exposed to your hypocrisy, are you going to change now, or are you going to double down? What this reminds me for me is in Matthew 7, when the famous Jesus says, don't judge lest you be judged. For with the judgment you use, it will be judged to you. And with the measure you use for others, it will be measured to you. And then in particular, this illustration is great. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye when behold, there is a log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your own eye, when there is a log sticking out of your eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. So what he has to do in this movie, when he has that moment, kids, you work for him. He had to deal with, at the beginning of the movie, he said, man, one time I saw my son run away from a fight. I was so embarrassed. I said, I'm going to make a man out of you if I have to break you in two. And then eventually he got into fights with his son. At 16, his son punched him, and he's 22 years old. He won't talk to his dad. His dad is resentful about that. And it seems like, juror number 3 isn't voting guilty so much because he thinks his kid is guilty, but because he sees a disrespectful young man. Yeah. And he wants him to get what he deserves.
Yeah.
And finally, he has a painful moment where he has to remove the plank from his eye. Remove his resentment and his unforgiveness. And he falls down sobbing and says, not guilty. You go, yeah, I mean, how many of us watching, you just, a poignant question, you said, what kind of man are you?
Mm-hmm.
Another question this movie asks you is, when you come face to face with your own hypocrisy, are you going to double down or are you going to actually change?
Wow.
You're like, that is heavy.
That'll preach, as some people like to say on this podcast.
That'll preach.
It's interesting. You were just talking about how easily influenced some of these men are just by the peer pressure that shows up inside that deliberation room. So something that just came into my mind as you were talking about that is, look at who the final two holdouts are. It's juror number 3 and juror number 4. So what's the difference between these two men? You have juror number 4, who throughout, he's the one who doesn't sweat. And so at the end of the movie, he is able to still lay out a very reasoned explanation for why he is still voting guilty. There are a couple of things that are just, for him, these are the pieces of evidence that matter the most. He just can't get past, unless you can explain these to me, I can't get to not guilty. So he lays out his reasoning. And what does juror number 3 do? He echoes what juror number 4 says. He never offers his own insight or his own evidence or his own thoughts on this. He just echoes what he hears number 4 say, to the point where number 3 even ends up saying, you can throw out the rest of the evidence because all that matters is the eyewitness testimony of this woman. And doesn't that, speaking of your point about hypocrisy, Miles, doesn't that statement come back to bite him when juror number 8 goes through that eyewitness testimony and makes the point about the eyeglasses, and then all of a sudden juror number 2 has to remind juror number 3, oh wait, you said nothing else matters except that eyewitness testimony. So he didn't have any original thoughts. He was just glomming on to what he was hearing other people say and hoping it would be enough to justify him. And then as soon as his hypocrisy is shown, he doesn't have a leg to stand on. He never came up with his own thoughts to begin with. Even juror number 4, once number 8 kind of gets him to the point of like, well, actually, I guess it's number 9 who brings up the point about the indentations on the nose from the eyeglasses.
Well, they team up. It's
Mm-hmm. And but once they get number 4 there, you can see that realization dawn on him. Like, oh, I get it now.
Yeah.
So he was never entrenched just because he was digging in his heels because he had a point that he wanted to make. He was sticking to his guns. He was just as principled as number 8 was. They were just on opposite sides. So it wasn't until he could be sure he was wrong. But as soon as he got to that moment, then he was like, you know what? I was wrong. I'm at not guilty now too. So I can appreciate that about juror number 4, that he was fighting for what he thought was right until he had enough evidence to finally admit, I was wrong about this. It would be
makes you think like, what if this kid's actually guilty in the end?
Right.
And he's just a bleeding heart But with all of this, what you brought up reminds me of really when it comes to Christians trying to convince people to follow Jesus, to give a reason for the hope that they have, as 1 Peter 3:15 says in Apologetics.
Yeah.
I remember Tim Keller, when he wrote his book, The Reason for God, he said that people believe things primarily for 3 different types of reasons. There's intellectual, that's evidence-based. Then there's emotional, what impact has this subject matter been on me? And then there's social. And he goes, you actually have to answer all of these questions. And so you go, well, juror number 3 appears to have an emotional problem with not guilty. And so that's the anger that he needs to get over and deal with his hypocrisy. Juror number 4 was intellectual, was the facts. And then like social, this bleeds pretty well into another guy who's pretty troubling. Remember this, juror number 10, this moment when he spews out all this bigotry toward this kid. Don't you know these people? They don't need a reason to kill. They get drunk. They're violent. They think they can do anything. And so he's going group versus group. Don't you understand that they are some vile type of people? But as he's spewing this, he realizes my group, this is an honor shame scene right here where they just go, I'm turning my back to you. I'm not going to argue with you. I just want you to know that what you're saying, this is faulty reasoning. This is prejudice and wrong. It's like, that's a pretty powerful, when you were talking about masculinity, keeping each other in check, this is, anybody can do this, but these men just all deciding, no, I'm not going to hear this, even though I'm trapped in the room with you. And you just see this movie unfolds why do people believe or disbelieve certain things.
Yes.
And so sometimes I think as a Christian, you're trying to convince somebody, well, Jesus, he's the hope for my life. He's the King of Kings. He actually lived, actually died, actually rose from the grave. You present the evidence, and they're going, well, no, actually, the truth is that I hate a lot of people who have claimed to be Christians because of X, Y, and Z. And you go, oh, I'm doing the entirely wrong argument for this person. Go, there's just a lot of that when you abstract. You go, what does this movie show us about how anybody changes their mind about anything?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and I guess maybe I want to just make this point here because, again, in the Receive, Reject, Redeem round, there's another point that I'll bring up so I want to take a clear stand on this here, that there is such a thing as truth. And I think, we kind of need to plant our flag there. I just want to be careful in how we're talking about this movie because it's so important, again, in the context of the legal system to leave that room for doubt. But I just want to make sure that we're saying, as far as what we believe and our faith is concerned, we believe in objective truth. We believe that there is such a thing as true and false. We believe that there is right and wrong. We have to be humble. It requires humility to acknowledge that there is right and wrong. I think we live in a world that demands that we shift our definitions all the time, that we put a stamp of approval on things that we cannot, according to God's word, we cannot approve these things. It requires humility to say that, though. It requires humility to submit to the will of a sovereign, supreme creator. And the funny thing is, in the world, if the world tries to exist without absolutes, then it creates absolutes anyway, just by saying nothing is true. Well, that's a truth, so you cannot, it comes back on itself. It's, like an infinity loop. You can't live that way. There has to be a standard. There has to be yes and no. And so I think the great thing about this,
like, these men are trapped in a room where they have to make a decision based on imperfect evidence. Right. And it's like, that actually is kind of a microcosm of life, is that like, I know I have imperfect evidence for aspects of my Christian worldview. Some are more or less. And you'd be like, yeah, often, but really we are trapped in this room and we are trying to decide, based on the evidence that we have, how to live our lives. Yeah. How should we view the world? And it's like, that's probably why this movie is so good, because it'll just, whatever you're going through, there's a way to connect to what these guys are doing when they get trapped in a room, stripped of their names in the plot, given a number and a job.
And I think, it's so Christianity as a faith system can withstand the curiosity and the doubts. It holds up to all of that. But what it comes down to is, whose authority are we submitting to? Because, one of the things I think what this movie shows so well is that these men are on a quest for the truth. I think one of the things that really fascinated me today watching this movie again is that between the 12 jurors and even the 2 eyewitness testimonies that we hear about that were involved in this case, there is not, I should probably be careful about it. I was just going to say there's no one I would say is outright lying. I even think the 2 eyewitnesses who ended up, the jurors were able to poke holes in their eyewitness testimony. I don't get the sense that either of those eyewitnesses was deliberately trying to tell a falsehood. It's just, our memories.
I think they even say that in the movie is maybe they convinced themselves, but she was a little vain.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
With the glasses?
Yeah. Yeah. So we see over and over again that even though there is very much a quest for truth happening in this movie, it's the quest itself is marred over and over again by sin. We are fallen creatures. We live in a fallen world. Our memories are not perfect. Our eyesight is not perfect. We thought we heard something, but there was a train going by. We couldn't possibly have heard it. Or we see something and that makes us think that we heard something. It's not, it doesn't have to be a lie for it not to be true. So I just think, I think this movie does a really great job with that. So then in the end, it keeps coming back to then whose authority are we submitting to ultimately, from the Christian worldview? And then in the context of the movie, who is humble enough to say, I don't know. I don't know for sure. I can't answer that question satisfactorily. And who, speaking of being masculine, who has the guts to admit being wrong? because that's a hit to your pride. It's very hard to do that. So again, I think,
it's interesting. Like, at the beginning of the movie, juror number 8, he's like sweating and like, I'm just saying it's possible. Like he's kind of slumped. He's not making himself big. He's kind of slumped over.
Yeah.
But what you bring out is one basic thought in this movie, like you're talking about between the witnesses. I thought of, the 10 Commandments. The 9th commandment, I believe, is you shall not bear false testimony. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor.
Yeah.
And like, even with the old man, juror number 9 is sympathetic to him and says, maybe he hasn't been listened to. Right.
Yeah.
I can understand that, until eventually they go, it's falling through. I can have sympathy for the way the man wanted to be listened to, but you're right. He marred this case with sin. And then, so it was the old man's vanity wanting to be listened to. And then the witness of the woman, her vanity of not wanting to appear with the glasses, and then not kind of wanting to admit that she wears glasses.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, you can actually see how sins that seem kind of little, vanity, wanting to be paid attention to, wanting to be thought great of, can put a man's life at stake.
Yes. Yep.
And so, wow, you drew out character studies of people who didn't even appear on screen and pop that into my head.
Yeah. Well, and I think, because it all just comes back to this idea again, just, it doesn't have to be a deliberate lie for it not to be true. I think, it comes, maybe I would just say this as well. As Christians, we must believe that there is right and wrong, there is true and false. But I also would say, just in case there's anybody listening to this episode who maybe has personally experienced a miscarriage of justice, I think if there's any encouragement that I could offer, it would be that your only hope then is that God knows, because God is the perfect judge. So here on earth, we have juries of 12 people who are supposed to judge impartially and fairly and objectively, and we're really not capable of it. How could we, when we are sinful in our nature? So hopefully you get people who are doing the best they can with the evidence that's presented, but that doesn't mean that they are going to come to the right conclusion or that the judge will pass a fair sentence, or, there are so many things that can go wrong. So if that's you, if that describes you, take heart that there is an ultimate judgment coming. No matter what the miscarriage was here on earth, there is a God who sees, there is a God who knows, and that God will have the final say in all of this.
Amen.
So keep your hope where it belongs.
Yeah. And then in the meantime, if you ever become any part of the chain of justice, witness, right, law enforcement or the jury, do your best to take the responsibility to, as best you can, tap into true justice. This is human flourishing. Part of the kingdom of God is yes be yes, no be no. Loving your neighbor as yourself, not being partial in judgment, not loving a baseball game more than your neighbor, even a kid in the slums. And so this is, it's one of those movies that calls you up to be a better human being.
Yes, which it sometimes looks like having the humility to admit that you don't know. You can be better by humbling yourself and admitting a lack of knowledge. You don't have to always have the answers.
Yeah, even the Christians who have a lot of the important answers, sometimes Christians are too uncomfortable with uncertainty.
Yeah,
try to have the answers to everything and be like, look, I think I have the most important answers to some of the big questions, but I don't have all of them.
Yeah,
and I don't even have sorted out all of the implications of those answers revealed in Christ, but I've got some important ones.
Yeah.
And so you're like, all right, we do our best while we're in the jury situations, and then we walk out like the end of the movie.
Yeah. Well, and keep in mind too, for speaking to specifically the Christian audience, there's a moment in the movie when juror number 3 says, "What is this? Love your underprivileged brother week?" And that line, when I heard that today, I was like, oh my goodness, as Christians, yes, it is love your underprivileged brother. You know what? Let's go straight to it's love your underprivileged brother lifetime, And sometimes the form that takes is don't be partial. Just how many times does the Bible speak about justice being weighed on equal scales before God's eyes? One of the groups of people he condemns the most harshly throughout the scriptures is those who judge unfairly. So as Christians, don't be that person. Now, we don't always agree necessarily with the role that the government plays in compelling, that love your underprivileged, and the view that they take on that. But individually and within our communities, within our families, within our churches, absolutely, we should be loving our underprivileged brother. So whatever form that takes for you personally, but especially in this context of the legal system, if you ever are on that jury, do not be swayed by wealth. Do not be swayed by appearance. Don't be swayed by your presuppositions, your prejudices. It is your job, Christian brother and Christian
don't
sister,
be swayed.
Judge impartially.
Yeah, judge impartially. Like what I was thinking is in our generation, it's not often privilege against the poor. It's privilege on behalf of the prejudice on behalf of the poor.
Right.
Like if you wanted to really challenge our cultural presuppositions, is you put like a rich man, like a healthcare CEO or an insurance CEO on the trial, and have somebody there who's had like the type of miscarriage of justice you were talking about from one of those companies and say, well, of course they deserve it. And you'd be like, but is it possible that he's innocent of this crime? And are you willing to let any of those prejudices? That's why I think Deuteronomy 1 was so powerful, where it says, you shall hear the great and the small. Was it great and the lesser? What is the... Yeah, they said it better than I do. I don't remember. I just read it. You shall hear the small and the great alike. Yeah. And be impartial, blind in your judgments. Yes. And so, this movie calls us up to that. Yeah. I think with this, do you think we're ready for lightning round? I actually don't have any. So. Okay, well, drop the lightning because it started to rain midway through the podcast from hot to cold. Then, Bridget, do you have any receive, reject, redeem for us to finish out?
I have a couple in each category, so I'll just run through these quickly, Miles, and then, obviously, if you have any added thoughts on them, please jump in at any point. I put in my reject category, I would reject the idea that we see in juror number 10, especially, and to a certain extent we see it in juror number 3 as well, that they're so committed to a narrative to the point that they totally miss the humanity of the young man who is on trial for his life, and they also miss the truth, so missing out on both of them. Like, why else are we as Christians here on this earth if not to love and to seek truth? So they missed out on both of those things because of the narrative that they were committed to.
In John chapter 7, Jesus says, "Don't judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. Don't judge based on narratives. Don't judge on based on just what you judge with righteous judgment." That's the call. Yeah.
Yes. And one of the a phrase that I've kind of just been using to remind myself is, like I'm a high school teacher, some days you're just frustrated and you get to the end of your rope with your patients and everything. And so one of the things I kind of repeat to myself a lot is that every single person, whether it's one of my students, it doesn't matter who it is, every single person with whom I come into contact is a real person with a real soul that will spend a real eternity in a real place. And am I willing to take advantage of whatever opportunity God has provided for me to be in that person's life and to influence that person for his kingdom? So just, Christian, be about your Father's business. Don't miss out on the inherent worth of every single individual or the pursuit of truth and justice, because there is a talking point that you're too committed to that you miss that.
Yeah. Amen.
So I think I had another reject point, but we kind of already hit on that in some of our other discussion. But it was just about being so consumed with the world that you don't care about a man's life. So we talked about that with juror number 7.
The baseball game.
Yes, yeah. And what's funny though? I don't know if you remember at the very beginning of the movie, Miles, the first character we see really is the judge giving his instructions to the jury, and it's so funny because the words coming out of his mouth do not match his demeanor. So he's there, he's telling them this is a very weighty responsibility that you have, but he kind of he has his head on his
Does he take a shot?
He's like,
it's a little drink that he drinks. And I was like, is he?
Is he actually drinking?
Actually, for what it's worth, one reason why this movie was not buttered and salted for me is that the whole plot depends entirely on like bad judges and a terrible defense attorney, even though they address it, and the fact that I think juror number 8 breaks the law by presenting new evidence. Maybe.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
I mean, he plays the role as a defendant. Anyway, I'm sorry.
That's true. That is, yeah. I hadn't thought about that. But you know what? If I could just like maybe offer a counterpoint to that, what I think is really cool is that, so this poor kid had this awful attorney, but thank goodness then that there is a jury, because how many cultures and civilizations exist in the world that don't have a jury at all? It's just up to the judge to decide if you're guilty or not. So thankfully for him, his bad lawyer wasn't the final say, and the jurors were able to talk through that and process that and still come to a different conclusion. So you're right. The whole movie
it's great,
hinged
but it's
on that bad defense. But we see the hope that's still provided, and at least there is that jury to deliberate through that. So
yeah. I mean, that'll preach, in a world in which you got a bad defense attorney and everything seems against you, is there hope for a good jury? Somebody who's actually going to decide right and wrong.
Yeah. The last line of defense in many cases. So, some just very quick receives I thought from this movie. First of all, just the inherent worth of each individual. I love that where we start is just with juror number 8 being the only one at first who's humble enough to say, I just simply don't know. And don't you think we ought to talk about it, since a kid's life is at stake? He's the only one right off the bat who's willing to have the conversation just because he's considering. Now, and I wouldn't go so far as to say that none of the other men cares about the weight of their responsibility. I don't think necessarily that they're that calloused about it. Some of them, but
except for 3 and 10, maybe. But
3 and 10,
some of them,
right?
They just think it's an open and shut case. Easy.
Yes,
he's
7.
A slum kid.
Yep.
Just same old story.
Yep.
Kid from the hood kills his father.
Yeah.
Boo-hoo, put him in jail. Let's go watch the baseball game. You go, hold on.
Well, and to your point, an earlier point that you brought up too about the social reason why we make decisions, I think I would be very curious to go back and watch this movie one more time to see the first vote that they take when they all just do it by raising their hands. Mm-hmm. Who are the last ones to put their hands up?
Yeah.
I'd be very curious if number 2 was one of the final ones to raise it, because he's so quiet. He's so naive about a lot of things, So I don't think it's that all of these people lost sight of the fact that they were deciding the fate of a human being's life, but some of them certainly had. So I just, let that weight sink in. If you ever find yourself on a jury or, in that kind of position, just keep in mind the stakes, it should weigh on you. It should be heavy. Just make sure that you're coming to the best conclusion that you possibly can. And then, along those lines too, stand for truth, even if you are the only one. At one point, juror number 9 says about juror number 8, it isn't easy to stand alone against ridicule. Yeah. And it's not, probably most of us as Christians have been in some kind of situation in our lives where we are the only voice for truth, or we have to take a stand that no one else around us is taking. And it's really hard. And maybe if we're being honest with ourselves, we can think of a time when we compromised too, because we didn't love being the only one taking the stand. Yeah. So, my encouragement again, for whatever it's worth to everybody listening, would just be, if you find yourself in that situation, just remember that the final time you stand will be before the judgment of God the Father. And thankfully, through the blood shed by his son, Jesus Christ, we know that judgment isn't there to condemn us, but we are still going to have to give an answer for everything that we did in this life, every word that we spoke, every single misplaced thought and deed. We're going to have to stand before our Creator and give account for that. Yeah. And so, speaking of things that should weigh on us a little bit, try to keep that perspective, so that if you are in that situation where you're the only one standing, stand because God is with you in that moment, even if no one else is, and He's the one who will ultimately be able to tell you, "Well done, my good and faithful servant."
It's fun. We were talking about this in church, when I love it when Joshua meets the angel of the army of the Lord in the conquest, and he says, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" And the angel says, "No." And I love what's behind that, is that you need to ask not whether God is on your side or on their side, but whether you are on God's side. Ultimately, it's like you need to ask a completely different question in the end. And any of these movies about justice and the justice system will make you start thinking about ultimate justice.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I'll just bring up one of my redeem points. You kind of alluded to this just a couple of minutes ago, Miles, and I think it's something that we kind of have to grapple with. In the end, the defendant might be guilty. We don't know.
Yeah.
So all juror number 8 did was raise the reasonable doubts. He could not. Now he's following the letter of the law by doing that, right? Like, so that is how our justice system is set up. You don't prove innocence. It's on the defense to. It's on the prosecution to prove guilt. It is not on the defense to prove innocence, because you can't prove the absence of something. You can't, you can't always prove that something didn't happen. So our founding fathers deliberately set up our justice system that way. And it should be that. It should be hard to sentence a man to death. It should not be something that can just happen in 5 minutes the way, that's exactly the point that juror number 8 was trying to make all along.
I can't believe this didn't come up earlier, but where the movie really shifts is when he pulls out that similar knife.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And he said, it's against the law to buy it. I said, yeah, it cost me $6.
Yeah.
And in that moment, there's the shift of, it might be possible, and there is a reasonable doubt. Not just a bleeding heart, not just, I feel bad for this kid.
Yeah.
Because people that you feel for often commit terrible crimes, but there is a reasonable doubt here. And let's open up our minds to the possibility.
Right.
Like,
so
that's
one of the
scene you remember.
Yeah. One of the jurors says to juror number 8, suppose you talk us out of this and the kid really did knife his father. So that possibility exists. But then so does the opposite of that. Suppose juror number 8 doesn't talk them out of it and they kill an innocent man. So which one of those outcomes, I think our legal system requires us to prioritize letting a guilty man go free over the possibility of taking the life of an innocent man. But that's hard, it's hard to wrestle with that. So
it's interesting that our default position of our justice system is mercy toward the potentially guilty.
Yeah.
Based on our fallibility.
Yes.
It's not because we don't care about justice.
Right.
And man, praise God, we thank you, Lord, for putting me living in a system where there is that, in case I ever end up on the wrong end of this.
Yes. Yep. Amen.
So that's good.
That's all I had for those. So yeah.
So probably your cup is overflowing a bit here. We have plenty to plenty to talk about.
I there.
It's funny how your mind will change after a little bit of even just an hour of deliberation. And so, Bridget, thank you for joining.
I didn't convince you on your fresh.
I still think it's pretty fresh.
So, yeah.
I mean, it's flimsy premise of the plot. Some of the things were a bit cliched, but no, it's very fresh. I don't know. I'm still unconvinced. A hung jury on that one. But yes, thank you for joining, Bridget, and thank you for making it this far, Popcorn Theologians. Until next time, keep engaging media and movies from a godly perspective, and remember, you are not a mindless consumer.
Thanks for watching this episode of Popcorn Theology. For more content, subscribe on YouTube. Follow and interact on social media to help broaden the conversation. Check out our archive of past episodes at popcorntheology.com or wherever you listen to podcasts, and consider becoming a patron saint by supporting us on Patreon, which lets you interact, influence, and enjoy exclusive bonus content.